Jai Prabhuji, hello. We are at our third class in the chapter that deals with the topic of freedom, the third and the last one. And today we are going to read an article that answers the question if freedom can be misused. This is the question that is presented. And Prabhuji's answer to this question is, of course, freedom means that it can be misused, or else it won't be freedom. Freedom must include all the possibilities. If there was a very certain, predetermined, obvious outcome of our life, we can say, of our path, this would not be freedom because it means it leads to a very specific option. And when we speak about freedom, we speak about all possibilities we are choosing among all possibilities. So we must also have the freedom to make mistakes, to fail. As human beings, we understand, as we have already understood in the previous two articles, that freedom is our essence, that as human beings we are free. We are free to be happy. We are free to be miserable. We are free to succeed or to fail. We are free to be kind or to be unkind to others. We have this freedom. Of course, in very extreme, we can be very kind or very unkind. We can decide to be saints, we can decide to be sinners. And we can decide, we have the freedom to decide if we want to acknowledge our freedom, to be familiar with our freedom, to realize our freedom, or to choose slavery. This is part of our freedom. To be slaves, it's one of the choices that we can choose. We will see in this article more about this aspect. But the fact that we can choose to be slaves testifies that we are free. Dear Prabhuji, can freedom be misused? Unlike slavery, freedom can be misused. It is said that to err is human. Hence, anyone can use freedom inappropriately. Slavery, on the other hand, can never be misused. Prisoners are deprived of their ability to choose. Slaves cannot misuse their captivity. When freedom is taken away, misjudgment is also impeded. Freedom entails choice and therefore the possibility of going in the wrong direction. And the next point that Prabhuji is making is that in slavery or captivity, there is no choice. When there is no choice, it means we cannot fail. We can make no mistake. We are, in a way, at peace because nothing is in our hands when we are in slavery. It has nothing to do with our decision. And I think that as human beings, if we contemplate about our lives, we can recognize easily that we constantly judge ourselves. We evaluate. Did we act right? Did we act wrong? Did we do the right thing? How we were supposed to respond? What do we do with our life about our choices? And this, in a way, testifies that we understand that it's in our hands, that we are choosing all the time, or else we wouldn't feel that we failed or feel proud. If we are proud of something, it means that we understand that it was our choice. If we just followed, again, a predetermined route, there's nothing to be proud about. If we just followed a predetermined route, there's nothing to feel bad about or to feel that we didn't succeed. So this fact that we evaluate ourselves means that we acknowledge that we have choices, that we can mold our lives in the way that we find is the most appropriate. And of course, it is a quite overwhelming fact for us human beings in our experience, this understanding that we are choosing every second and the clock is ticking. The time is moving and we need to make choices every second, every day, every week, etc. all our life. So we are all familiar with this fact that freedom is a significant aspect of our life. For Aristotle, human beings are rational creatures, but their instincts remain animalistic. Even though they have the faculty of reason, they share their instinctive desires with the animal kingdom. According to Descartes, nature pursues its own goals through animals, which act in accordance with their instincts. Just as it is for animals, most of human behavior is motivated by certain instinctive demands. So here we see in these words presented to us our animalistic aspect as human beings. We see it reflected in the thought of Descartes, in the thought of Aristotle, that they recognize the fact that we have in us as human beings animalistic nature. Animalistic means predetermined, means mechanic, means no choice. No choice. This body has specific requirement. We have to follow specific actions in order to maintain it. And this is a manifestation of the fact that it is animalistic, just like the animals. And of course, all of us know we have a lot of tendencies within us that are animalistic. Nevertheless, Prabhuji tells us, we are not animals. The fact that we have this animalistic nature does not mean that this is our entire existence, because we can recognize that unlike animals, we have some freedom that they do not have, to think, to decide, to live very differently than one another. Animals, all dogs are living pretty much the same. They are not so distinct from each other. They have very predetermined life and actions. There is nothing too unpredicted or interesting about their lives. Human beings have vast array of possibilities. Again, as we said in the beginning, we can choose so many different routes, so many different levels of intensity of living, different levels of ambitions as human beings. And this is our freedom. We are not just instincts, not just bodies, but there is some other aspect that exists in us and characterizes our existence. Since only human beings have access to freedom, only they can misuse it. Their freedom entails moral responsibility. In his famous work, Existentialism is a Humanism, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Man is condemned to be free." The French philosopher thought that freedom was inherent to the human condition and that human beings were responsible for using it. Mankind is the only species capable of being free and of mitigating, sublimating, and transcending its desires. We mentioned in these classes a few times the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is a scripture that describes to us a dialogue between the divine and we can say the human, or master and a disciple, Krishna and Arjuna. And we've mentioned in the past that Arjuna was in some kind of a dilemma, a conflict, a difficulty to perform his action, and Krishna guides him toward the performance of his duty, towards the realization of his duty, and the realization of his true nature, towards spiritual awakening, we can say. And after Krishna describes to Arjuna the highest truth, our ultimate nature, our different tendencies, different paths of yoga, different ways that personality is followed in order to transcend their animalistic nature, their egoic phenomenon, toward the very end of the Bhagavad Gita, finally Krishna tells Arjuna, "Everything that I have shared with you is only my opinion. And now you can contemplate about this knowledge that I have presented to you. Ultimately, you will do what you want." And we can see it in both ways, that please, finally don't follow me, but choose yourself, do what you want. You don't have to follow me. Maybe this is what Krishna tells Arjuna. Or that inevitably you will do what you want. You have this freedom, and as I think we have mentioned it in previous articles already, we have encountered it, you are bound to this freedom. You have no choice but do what you want. Ultimately. When we hear knowledge, even if this knowledge arrives from realized beings, For us, it's words. It can be maps, it can be inspiration, it can be a testimony. It is not our truth. These are just, it can be a book, it can be a lecture, it is words. For us, it's a theory. For them, it might be just a testimony again and not a theory, genuine experience. But for us, until we have not realized it ourselves, we do not know. And this freedom on which we hear about from Prabhuji, it's not something that we can accept it as a belief because we heard it from someone else. But Prabhuji speaks about some existential freedom that we can only realize, we can only be it. And similarly, Krishna tells Arjuna, this state of performing your duty, of transcending the egoic tendencies, is a state of being. No one can do it for you. You have the freedom, and you must perform genuine actions only out of your authentic nature. There is no other way. So even we can hear maybe dogmatic religious people will tell us all the truth existing in this scripture. Krishna himself tells us, I only share my opinion. Krishna does not say this is the words of God and you must follow them no matter what you think. Krishna says, because I like you, because I love you, because you are dear to me, I reveal to you this knowledge. But you will do what you want. And we see this beautiful manifestation of freedom, which we brought it here intentionally to reflect on the words of Jean-Paul Sartre, that is existentialist, who claimed that there is no highest truth, there is no God, there is no heaven, there is no hell, only freedom. Our existence is just freedom. And with this freedom, we can do what we want. And our reality is only what we do. There's nothing else. We don't have anything predetermined except for what we choose. Our life is our choices. This is what Jean-Paul Sartre says. And we see this freedom manifested as well in Krishna's word. Arjuna, you do what will be ultimately with all these words that I shared with you is what you will choose. And I cannot do it for you. This will be only your choice. Let's read this beautiful verse from the Bhagavad Gita. Iti tenyanam akyatam guyad guyata ramaya vimrushyaita dasheshena yatechasi tadhakuru. Thus, I have explained to you this knowledge that is more secret than all secrets. Ponder over it deeply, and then do as you wish. Bhagavad Gita 1863. So what as we see in Krishna's words is that this knowledge of which I have spoken about is the most secret of all secrets. And we can understand what I revealed is not words, because words are not the most secret of all secrets. The most secret of all secrets, Prabhuji once said, is something that cannot be told, that can only be discovered because it's such a secret. It can be in front of our eyes, but we won't know it if we didn't realize it, because it's such a secret. It cannot be revealed by another. So Krishna tells Arjuna, I reveal to you this knowledge, but this is the most secret of all secrets. It depends on our freedom to be recognized. The next point that we are going to meet in Prabhuji's words is the fact that as human beings, what Prabhuji will share in this word, we are not a final product. We are not yet what we are supposed to be. This is why we feel this way, right? Everybody feels a little bit like a mess in this experience. This is okay. This is our existential positions, we can say, as human beings. We're in between an animal and the divine, in between something that we were and no longer, and something that we maybe one day will be. We are not ready, not finalized. This painting is not yet drawn. And I remember that once Prabhuji spoke with us about the fact that if we look at the eyes of any animal, we can recognize some peace. some completeness. They have arrived. They are what they are supposed to be. Everything is in place. They are not in any conflict, in any dilemma, in any process. They are not going anywhere. They are already what they are supposed to be. Differently, if we look at human beings, we can recognize in everyone's eyes some anxiety, some lack of peace. We are not settled. We have not arrived. We are in the process. And we feel that this process is not yet complete, is not yet finalized. Let's read. For Friedrich Nietzsche, human beings are not the final goal, but only a phase in a process leading to greatness. Humanity represents an evolutionary bridge between the beast and the overman. Mankind is a rope fastened between animal and overman, a rope over an abyss. What is great about human beings is that they are a bridge and not a purpose. What is lovable about human beings is that they are crossing over and a going under. Thus spoke Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche is right. Unlike animals, human beings are not complete. Chickens are born as chickens and cannot change their nature. The life of an animal is a finalized process. Human beings, on the other hand, are under construction. They are a process stretching between animal and divine nature, between the instinctive and the transcendental essence. They move from unconsciousness to consciousness. They are a rope strung over an abyss into which they can fall if they misuse their freedom. They can hit the bottom or reach divine heights, lift themselves up or tear themselves down, transcend the mind or become its slaves. The singularity of human beings lies in the fact that they are not born completed and programmed. Understanding and accepting this freedom turns our life into a challenge to complete ourselves. So again, what we see is we are a process, we are not finalized, and the conclusion of this word that we just read is that we need to figure out how to produce this product that is not yet ready. It's not enough that we feel like a mess and we feel that we have not arrived. This is not our home yet. We are just in the middle of something, in some process. We need also to figure ourselves how to lead ourselves toward our evolution, toward transcending. Prabhuji says in this experience we can reach the heights and we can fall into this abyss on which we cross. If we wouldn't be able to sink, to meet the bottom, there would be no meaning to the heights. This height must be relative. So it means that necessarily we can fall. We can misuse our freedom. But we can also use our infinite freedom in order to elevate, in order to transcend, in order to grow, as we hear from rishis and various personalities that speak about the ability to elevate ourselves, to transcend the human nature. The same process on which Nietzsche speaks when he says that we are between the animal and the overman. We can walk toward our transcendence in this experience in which we are not yet finalized. And the next word that we are going to read focus more about the point that we are the creators of our lives. We have received in this human experience a lot of raw materials. We received the body with a lot of abilities, a mind with a lot of abilities, senses, a certain level of intelligence, certain socioeconomical situation in which we are placed, specific experiences that we experienced. We were born in a specific era. We have specific objects that we can interact with, such as books or movies or so many other things. These are the raw materials. Each one has a specific set of raw materials that he received, and we are different than one another. But we have, in addition to all these raw materials that we did not decide about, that we did not choose ourselves, we also have freedom, which is the choice. And we can use all our raw materials in order to design our life in the best that we find is the most favorable. So in the sense of freedom, we can speak about it in regard to the aspect that each one is going to live differently, to choose some specific individual path. We also spoke in the past of the fact that we are different individuals. And in addition, you meet here the point of high and low. We can succeed or fall. We can transcend or sink, which is something that as human beings, also all of us know, that we can go downward or push ourselves to transcend. And this can mean different things for different people in different times and circumstances. Maybe sometimes specific action will be for us transcending, and at a certain and at a different situation, the same action will be for us going down. This is not objective, concrete fact, what it means for us to transcend or what it means for us to give up. But we all know that we have these two routes in life, that we can choose mediocrity, that we can choose convenience, laziness, comfort, surrender to unfavorable situation, etc. Or we can choose to make an effort, to go the extra mile, as we say, to transcend our animalistic nature and walk more in the direction of the heights. We have this choice, and we also hear about it in the Bhagavad Gita. We can, just as Krishna told Arjuna, I cannot do for you this process of elevating yourself. I can present to you all the options. I can speak to you about different personalities who chose the path of elevation. But the choice itself, the effort itself, the challenge itself is only of the individual. And also Prabhuji reflects about these two tendencies that we have as human beings in this article. That is part of our freedom. It's the beauty of our human experience that we can choose at every moment. And we all know sometimes we can choose more to fall, sometimes we can choose more to transcend, but we are choosing always. And we can choose differently always. In the Bible we read, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Genesis 1:26. However, many verses declare that God is unique. For example, the Lord is God in heaven above and on the earth below. There is no other. Deuteronomy 4:39. So how can a single God speak in the plural? With whom does God speak when he says, let us make? Who else joined God in the process of creation? If I say to someone, let's dance, they will understand that I'm inviting them to be an active participant in the dance. When God says, let us make, regardless of whom he is addressing, he is clearly referring to another active participant in creation. In fact, he was speaking to the first man, Adam. God created all creatures, but unlike animals and the rest of creation, human beings are not just his work, but a partnership between him and them. By saying, let us make men, God tells Adam that his creation, in fact, is ours. He tells us that even though he created us, it is our duty to continue. By completing ourselves, we are taking part in the divine work. Human beings are not a finalized creation, but architects of their own destiny. Their essence is freedom. To deny this is to rob them of their essence. The misuse of freedom is obviously possible because humans can err. Freedom implies that we can make right or wrong decisions. If we were not able to choose incorrectly, we would not be truly free. Naturally, going down is tempting because it requires less effort and energy than going up. So we see here another example. We gave Krishna as an example that God gives us freedom, and here we see just the same principle that is presented in this word that Prabhuji brings from the Bible. God tells Adam, the first man, let us make. And Prabhuji explains, we are doing it together. God cannot complete our existence without our own participation. This creation of a human being, the idea of in this creation is that we are co-creators, unlike animals. In our case, we are doing it together with the divine. This is what we're given to us from God Himself, the ability and the requirement to be active participants. We cannot remain idle and give up this participation in this creation process. We must take part. If we don't take part, it's part of our participation, who will be expressed for sure in the results. And here also Prabhuji says, of course, it is natural, it is easy to go down. This tendency is going to pull us all throughout our lives, also as part of our human experience. Because it requires less energy, less effort, less resistance to our animalistic nature, to our desire to fall down and to relax and to give up. We have this all the time controlling us, controlling our lives. But the choice that we can make as human beings, different than animals, is to resist this tendency, not to listen to it, not to follow it, not to surrender to it, but constantly challenge ourselves to be better than what we were yesterday, to be better than what we feel like being, to transcend, to elevate again. Freedom is a challenge that implies responsibility. We are intimidated by the risk of erring. That is why most people choose to place their lives in the hands of others. We blame others for our defeats and failures. We criticize our parents for the way they raised us, and we put spiritual masters in charge of our enlightenment. Afraid of making mistakes, we live according to rules decreed in a sacred book or by a guru. We renounce our freedom to keep from making a wrong decision. If we were not afraid to accept responsibility over our lives, society would be full of enlightened beings. Every day we would see beings such as Krishna, Jesus, and Buddha. However, we have been intimidated for centuries both by politicians and religious leaders. Politicians have frightened us with poverty, hunger, and war, and religious leaders have done so with hell. Fear has been cultivated in order to dominate the masses, and that is why there are so few enlightened beings. So here Prabhuji talks with us about this route that we often choose as human beings, which is the route of the slavery. We spoke about the fact that in freedom we can make mistakes. We are not only responsible, but the only responsible. There is no one that we can turn into with blame, with demand, with request to take responsibility, because we decided. We did our best effort to judge, to evaluate, to think, to feel, and to act. So whether we are right or wrong, we know it was our responsibility because we exercised our responsibility, our ability to respond to life, our choice to be present and to make our own individual decision. In this attitude in life, we will never blame others because we understand, we recognize evidently that we chose it. If we chose the path of dependency on others, on following others, whether it is our parents, our circumstances, the society, the politicians, the religious leaders, or enlightened gurus and enlightened scriptures, without genuine involvement, individual responsibility, it is natural that we will turn into them with blame when things will not go the way we expected it to be, because we followed a specific path with some desire for specific result, specific promised result, either promised to us or in our imagination. This is why we have interpreted. But the source of our actions were not ourselves, but other entities. If we depend on our past, on our experiences of the past, of our circumstances, we will keep on blaming the past for whatever happens to us. Because we don't choose, we just react to life. We are just a result of something. We are not a process, and we are not the creators of the process. We are not the designers of our life. We are just in specific circumstances, and then we have no way, no choice, no freedom to be different, because of our past we are like this. We will continue to find excuses or reasons or justifications, whatever we want to call it. But the important point is that we prevent ourselves the freedom to act differently. Only when we renounce these past events, our parents, our circumstances, and the religious leaders, and the politicians, and our enlightened guru, and choose ourselves, then we can take responsibility and we will not blame anyone else, whether we failed or succeeded. We attribute our life to ourselves. Our lives are of ourselves in any case, but some of us sometimes attribute them to others, which is the point on which Prabhuji speaks about here. We choose oftentimes slavery because it is much more convenient that we are not the ones who make the errors. We are not the ones who failed because someone else is controlling our life, is directing our life, so it's not our mistakes. This is why we choose this path. But when we choose slavery, what we condemn ourselves to be is belonging constantly to other entities and not claiming our own ownership of ourselves, of our lives, of our experiences, of our decisions, of our past, of our future. We are the creators. We are the designers. We are in charge here. This is, I think, the freedom on which Prabhuji speaks about in all the 3 articles that we have read in relation to this fundamental topic of us, human beings. Prabhuji here mentions the word intimidated twice. One is that we are intimidated to make mistakes. Again, it's too overwhelming, this position. And the second time that he mentions this word is that we are intimidated by the leaders of the society, whether the religious leaders who speak about hell, heaven and hell, and make us afraid, intimidated, or the politicians who speak to us about hunger and etc. Different circumstances that should cause in us fear, dependency, and specific actions accordingly, specific outcome. We are acting in a specific way out of this fear that we experience from these messages that are projected to us. And these messages, both from religious leaders and politicians, are not projected to us just by them, just by these specific leaders, but all the crew of mass that follows them out of the fear of the freedom, out of the choice to be slaves, echoing the same messages. So we are in this human experience receiving so many messages that tell us to be afraid, to be careful, not to jump into our freedom, acquire our freedom, and figure out how to act, but out of this fear, act in a very specific way. Avoid very specific paths, do very specific actions, so no one is going to arouse this fear in us, intimidate us. So we said this word is presented in relation to us feeling intimidated by our own selves. We don't want to make mistakes, and by the external messages that we receive. And we spoke about it in the past, that the voices that we have inside us and the voices that we receive from the outside world are very much in line with each other. They project to us the same message, both of which are threatening our freedom, threatening our bravery to choose this freedom, to embark on this journey of freedom, of claiming our freedom as individuals and living our own lives. Regardless of all these voices from inside and from outside, the beings that are, Prabhuji speak about them, that are enlightened beings, they transcended both voices, the mind and the outside world. And if we were not afraid of making mistakes, Prabhuji tells us, if we were not choosing slavery, we would see every day enlightened beings walking on this planet, but this is not the case. Enlightened beings, realized beings, individuals who chose to realize this freedom in its fullness, because as we said, we are free whether we want it or not. We cannot stop to be free, but there are beings who recognize it and made an effort to transcend any slavery, any ties that prevent for them this freedom, are those who were able to transcend this lowest tendency to surrender to the animalistic nature, to what is convenient, to what everybody else says, to how it should be, to how it should look, to what will not upset anyone else. They were able to transcend it and live their own lives. Realized beings, on which Prabhuji talks about here, like Krishna, like Buddha, are those who transcended these fears. Both the internal fear to make mistakes. What if it would be wrong? What if it was wrong to leave the palace? What if it was wrong to practice austerities? What if it was wrong to sit under a tree and close the eyes for so many hours without any clear idea what will be this realization? They transcended this fear of making mistakes and followed their inner freedom in search of the ultimate realization of freedom. And they transcended the fear of the outside world that convince us constantly that we are not free, that we must act in a specific way, that we must avoid specific actions, that we must be like everybody else, that we should not be too individual, too genuine, too authentic, that there is nothing to look within ourselves because all the answers are outside and this is where we should look. These are the voices that we hear from everywhere. But these realized beings that are so rare, as Prabhuji presents here, are those who listen more to the freedom that they recognize inside themselves. And they followed this call, this experience of freedom, deeper and deeper until again its complete realization. I think we can look at it in this way. Mahatma Gandhi said, "Freedom is not worth having if it does not connote freedom to err. It is beyond my comprehension how human beings, be they ever so experienced and able, can delight in depriving other human beings of that precious right." So in these words, Prabhuji quotes here Mahatma Gandhi, who in addition to telling us that freedom includes the freedom to err, tells us that he cannot understand, he cannot comprehend how come a human being deprives the right of another human being to be free, even if it includes to make mistakes. I think that in a way Mahatma Gandhi, who we can recognize as a being that recognized freedom, that appreciated freedom, that valued freedom, cannot understand how a free human being, which we all are, that we all are, can deprive another of this right. I think that a being that recognizes his or her own nature as freedom, that we understood in all the articles that we have read, it is our essence as human beings, will never deprive of another entity of their freedom, because they recognize freedom as the highest value, more than power, more than fame, more than money, more than comfort. A being that deprives another human being of this basic right, the fundamental experience of us as human beings, which is freedom, necessarily in themselves, in herself, in himself, cannot be free beings. a being that again recognize their own freedom, the manifestation of it will be that they will encourage others to claim their freedom, to recognize their freedom, to be aware of their freedom and act out of their freedom, as we saw in the words of Krishna to Arjuna. Do what you wish. This is important. This is fundamental. This is our expression of us being human beings. A human being that obeys others does not fulfill his nature as a human being, because our nature is to be free. Our nature is to choose. And I think we mentioned that Jean-Paul Sartre spoke about the point that even inside very difficult circumstances of possibly torture, of possibly being in captivity in very harsh conditions, our freedom as human beings, the freedom on which we hear here, is still not taken of us. We can be deprived in our bodily freedom, in our circumstances, but we cannot be deprived of our freedom, which is freedom itself, to be free, to remain free individuals. And what Gandhi, I think, claims here is that he, of course, also does not understand how a human being tortures another human being and limits his external circumstances, and does not respect this being that it is a free being. How can you take an animal and relate to it like a product, like an object, like a matter, and not like something alive? How can you take a human being and relate to it like an animal? This is unperceived to beings that recognize the fact of freedom and the importance of this freedom in our human experience. Free beings can make mistakes but never fail, because errors teach them and contribute to their development. As Carl Jung said, in this way, the last thing I want to tell you, dear friends, is the following. Live your life as best you can, even if your life is based on an error, because life must be consumed and truth is reached by error. Instead of defeats, errors are an integral part of our evolutionary learning process. And now we hear in a way the good news. We understood that freedom can include to fall, to make mistakes, to mess up, to misuse this freedom, to go the wrong way, to waste time, etc. However, if our intention and attempt is constantly to grow, elevate, to seek truth, everything that happened to us is part of our learning evolutionary process that must include errors. These are not failures, Prabhuji tells us, but only stones on which we walk further in to learn and grow more and more. And here Prabhuji quotes another free being that we can see as we spoke in the light of Mahatma Gandhi, in his words of Jung, that he encourages others to recognize their freedom, to be free, to understand that they are free, and to accept the mistakes that they do as part of their freedom, as part of their experience as human beings, of their learning process. If you seek the truth, you will be completely transformed even if you do not find it. If you seek God, the search will totally change your life even if you do not reach self-realization. So this is a quote by Prabhuji, not part of this article, but a beautiful quote that stresses the same point, that if our direction is the height, is our realization of who we are, even if we make mistakes along the way, the path is successful, is glorious. We don't need to reach a specific goal. The path is the important process. Our life is a path, ultimately, as we saw in Nietzsche's word and in the reflection on the fact that we are in between. If we're in between, what is important is what happens in between, the path itself, not any specific result, any specific realization, but our life. So Prabhuji says, if we seek God or self-realization, our life will be transformed, will be meaningful, because our aspiration will color our life, will influence our life, will beautify our life because of the aspiration itself, and not because we succeeded in something, or achieved something, or conquered something, but because we aspired to transcend ourselves. This in itself, and the efforts that will follow out of this aspiration, already are going to beautify our lives, to make them meaningful. And Prabhuji concludes this article with, we can say, a personal disclaimer to us readers who read these words, who might be comfortable with this degree or another of some mediocrity, of some slavery, of some convenience, and encouraging to walk toward our freedom. And in this disclaimer, Prabhuji clarifies that in his words, he does not encourage us to follow his words. He does not encourage us to accept his words or to focus on him in any way. But just like we heard in the words of Jung, Gandhi, in the example that we gave of Krishna, in the example that Prabhuji gave about God himself, who told Adam, let us make together, you please be an active participant. And any free being that realizes the significant meaning of our freedom as individuals, Prabhuji encourages us in the end of this article to close the book and continue forward in our own unique, individual, specific way that is meant only for us, and do whatever we can, walk in whatever means and path we find appropriate for us toward our own individual discovery of our freedom. It is not my intention to restrict anyone's freedom, but to help understand it. Having comprehended what freedom is, make your own decisions. Do not be afraid to make mistakes, because in the long process of development, errors are as important as successes. The important thing is not to avoid falling down, but to understand the lesson. In the school of life, we learn both from our defeats and triumphs. Jai Prabhuji.